Hello everyone. So this video is going to inform you about metabolism and energy expenditure. As you're using this video and these slides to study, here are some learning objectives. You can read over the learning objectives and get an idea of where you stand with understanding the concepts as you review, particularly for exams. So let's start by talking about how we get energy to power ourselves, the human body. The human body uses fuel, and very common analogy is a car. Now, whereas a car has a central gas tank that it feeds through the car into the engine and basically explodes the gas in a controlled explosion, which releases energy, our bodies, the human body does something similar, although we have different sources, or what I call buckets. So we have different gas tanks. We have several gas tanks. The three big gas tanks are our macronutrients that we put into our body, that we eat: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. We break those down and use them for the energy that we need for exercise and just basically to live. So if I'm just sitting down at my desk or I'm laying in bed and I don't have anything that requires me to do a whole lot of movement, or I'm at rest, we could consider this what would be called homeostasis. Everything is in balance, right? My heart is beating, so my blood pressure is, my systolic blood pressure is kind of rising and falling, rising and falling. But everything is in balance. Now, when I begin moving, like getting out of bed, going to brush my teeth in the morning, or then obviously exercising, increasing the demand from your muscles and your joints and your cardiovascular system places stress on the body, and your body has to respond to that. And when it does, it moves away from that balance point, that homeostasis. It moves out of that. And homeostasis, if you consider it sort of like a balance beam or like a teeter-totter, becomes unbalanced, and we start responding to that stress. And one of the biggest responses is increased energy production. So metabolism is a word that describes the flow of energy, right? And so the flow of energy can be anabolic or catabolic. Catabolic is taking those large molecules, that carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and breaking them into smaller molecules, and creating energy. And one of the most important forms of energy that we use to power particularly our muscles is called ATP. Now, what we can do is also we can have an anabolic reaction where we take molecules, we combine them, and we grow things inside our body. The best example of that is muscle tissue. Growing more muscle tissue is anabolic. We go into more specifics with that in higher level exercise science classes like exercise physiology and advanced strength and conditioning and biomechanics. Okay, so we know what metabolism is. We need the energy, right? So how are we producing this energy? There's two main categories of energy production: aerobic production and anaerobic production. Okay, so we need to get this ATP, and we can develop this energy, this ATP, aerobically using oxygen as a catalyst, or using oxygen as kind of the spark to be able to produce the ATP. But if we could only use oxygen, we would be really, really slow. We wouldn't be able to get our energy as quickly, and that's why we have another method of producing ATP, and that's anaerobic production of ATP. It doesn't require oxygen, it's much, much faster. So we have these two categories of energy production. And so from those two categories, we peel out three systems under the umbrella of these categories. So under the umbrella of the anaerobic production, we have two systems. We have what's called the ATP-PC system, which is immediate, snapping my fingers, immediate energy system. Uses a molecule called creatine phosphate. That it's called the ATP-PC system. That stands for ATP phosphocreatine system. Okay, and if you've ever heard the word creatine before, The system that's most affected by supplementing with creatine is this one. Okay, it's super fast. It's used for energy for exercise. It's very short, explosive. Then there's this middle anaerobic system called glycolysis. There's a fast and a slow glycolysis. And so this is what I would call sort of the in-between energy system. It is actually just a little aerobic too. We talk about that more in upper level classes. If you want to kind of remember what this system is all about, it's the middle system where you're still going really hard, but for a little bit longer, under a 2-minute time period, right? So it's like 1.3 to 1.5 minutes-ish, maybe up to about 2 minutes, depending on how in shape you are. And this is the system where we develop a lot of lactic acid. If we're relying on this system, we're developing a lot of lactic acid. And this system primarily uses carbohydrates to develop ATP. And then our last system is like the king, the queen, the master, the commander, the aerobic system, right? The aerobic system is always working. It's you use it for any type of exercise, and if you really want to focus on the aerobic system, you're doing long-term exercise or exercises at lower intensities for longer periods of times. The aerobic system is a beast. It can use carbohydrates, fats, and proteins to produce ATP. So those are your energy systems. We have 2 anaerobics, 1 aerobic. Now, let's wrap in an understanding of muscle structure here. You have probably heard a little bit that we have what are called fast twitch and slow twitch type muscles in our body. Those match up really well with the different energy systems. Okay, so type 1 muscle fibers are aerobic. Type 2 muscle fibers are anaerobic. We have 2 different types of anaerobic muscle fibers, just like we've got 2 different types of anaerobic energy systems, and they match up with each other. The type 2A and the type 2B. Type 2B is your anaerobic muscle fibers that match up with the ATP-PC system. Your type 2A muscle fibers match up with your anaerobic glycolysis. Okay, so if we're doing a sprint, super fast sprint, we know that we're really focusing on those type 2B fibers. We're really focusing on using that ATP-PC system. That could also be like an explosive jump or like a power clean or something really fast and explosive. If you're running like 1 lap around a track, or let's say you had to sprint down Dame Mall around Old Main and come back, right? At Franklin College, then you would probably be using that anaerobic glycolysis a little bit. If you're running a marathon, that's aerobic. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about energy systems, because some of this stuff can be confusing, it's quite a bit of information. And if you're thinking about, okay, are we anaerobic or are we aerobic? What are we? Which system is it? Think about this very simple concept. How long you're exercising for is directly inverted with the energy system and the intensity that you're exercising. So the anaerobic, which is marked in the black and red here, the anaerobic systems are generally for higher intensity exercise. And when you're doing higher intensity exercise, you can't go for as long. The aerobic on the other end of the spectrum is for longer exercise, right? So you can go for longer periods of time because your intensity is lower, right? So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. Duration and intensity are inverses one another. If I tell you that exercise is happening over like an hour or even 90 minutes or even 45 minutes, you can say that exercise is primarily aerobic, okay? If I tell you I'm doing a 100-meter dash, you can say, well, that's probably ATP-PC. That's primarily anaerobic, and it's a very short period of time. You can't use the ATP-PC system for an hour, okay? Duration and intensity are inverses of one another. Now, one thing that I'm going to change the names of these real quick. update this guy. And then another name for the ATP-PC system is the phosphagen system, but we're going to keep it ATP-PC. And one thing that students tend to think about is they like to separate the systems, right? Okay, I'm doing a 100-meter dash, but then I keep going, so it's like a light switch. I turn off my ATP-PC, and then I turn on my glycolysis. And that's not how it works, actually. Like, as you're sitting, watching, listening to this video, all your systems are turned on, right? They're all producing energy. Depending on what you're doing, that will crank up the energy output in whatever system you're focusing on. So if you just started jogging down the street, all the systems would increase. And what I think of it like is like speakers, right? And each one has its own volume knob. So all of the speakers are turned on. And if you start jogging down the street, all the volume on all the speakers is going to increase. If you start sprinting, then your anaerobic speakers are going to get really loud. So is the aerobic, but these are going to be louder, at least for a minute or two, however long you sprint for. If you do a marathon, then eventually this speaker, the aerobic speaker, is going to be really, really loud. These systems are also going to be turned up, but not quite as loud as the aerobic. So it's a shift to whatever system you're focusing on. Okay, so they're always on. All of them are always on. They don't turn off and turn on. They're always on. So what we generally say is like, for this exercise or for what this athlete is doing right now, what would you say the primary energy system focus is? So this chart is really helpful. It can get you a better understanding of time and intensity. So over here on the left-hand column, this is all about time, right? You can see as we get to longer periods of time, we shift more to aerobic and less from anaerobic. And then over on the right-hand side, it's going to give you basically the same chart, but instead of time, it's going to give you some sports examples, which can help you kind of link this up with real life. All right, so we have a better understanding of how energy is produced. How do we measure that? Well, one thing you have information about already is how to use heart rate to measure exercise intensity. And that matches up really well with measuring energy expenditure. If we know how intensely someone's exercising, then we can get a really good idea of what energy system they're probably focusing on. So we can use heart rate. We'll also talk about just how much weight you're lifting in the weight room or percent body weight. Okay, so if we're looking at our heart rate and our energy systems and how they match up, it matches up probably how you would guess it would. If we're exercising at a very light, or even into a moderate intensity, no matter what measure we're using, RPE, percent max heart rate, or a heart rate reserve, we are going to be fairly aerobic, okay? As the exercise intensity increases, as these percentages increase, we get more into the anaerobic systems and producing energy that way. Okay, so what about in the weight room? Okay, we can use heart rate in the weight room, but we generally also use weights, a barbell or a dumbbell or whatever, a kettlebell, and the heavier the weight, the higher the intensity of the work, right? Now, from the National Strength and Conditioning Association, they have what's called this training load chart. And what this does is it gives you a really quick method of referencing how intense exercise will be compared to someone's 1 rep max. Someone's 1 rep max is any exercise and loading up the exercise until you can only do 1 repetition. Generally, the most popular lifts to use a 1 rep max test is squat, back squat, deadlift, and a bench press. Those are the most traditional lifts that we do 1 rep max testing on. You can do 1 rep max testing on other lifts, but those are the more traditional ones. So let's say your 1 rep max is 200, okay? And you want to train at 85%. So that would be 170 pounds. and you could expect to get about 6 reps at 85%, around there. It's not exact, right? So what if we want to do 12 reps at 70%? 12 reps at 70%, that'd be about 140 pounds. If you can lift 200 pounds, 70% should be around 140 for you, and you should be able to get about 12 reps. That's how that chart works. Now, let's match it up with our energy systems, right? We have percentages. So we know that if we have a larger number of reps, this could go 10, 12, 15, 20, right? If we're doing higher repetitions, then our percentages are dropping, and so is the weight. So the intensity is going down, which means that's going to be more aerobic, right? More type 1 muscle fiber focus. As we start increasing the intensity and getting closer to our 1 rep max, that's going to be more anaerobic. That's going to move us into the type 2A muscle fibers, into the type 2Bs. All right, last but certainly not least, doing a 1 rep max is great if you have the time and if you have somebody with the ability to lift heavy weight. That's not always the case, particularly with somebody that's new to weightlifting. So when a 1 rep max is not appropriate and we want some other way to measure exercise intensity, percent body weight is a great way to get an idea of how well someone is doing and how they're progressing in intensity compared to what they've done before. So, and I should say compared to their own body weight, right? So you take the weight they're lifting and divide it by their body weight, okay? And what that amounts to is their percentage body weight. So if somebody weighs 200 pounds and they lift 200 pounds, that's going to equal 1.0, which is 100% of their body weight. So this chart here gives you an idea for those traditional lifts, bench press, the squat, the deadlift, where average performances are above average and excellent. So if someone can lift 2.75 times their body weight, that's 275% of their body weight. That would place them in the excellent category. Generally, the closer you're moving towards like 300% or 3.0% of your body weight, you're getting into like some generally more advanced and elite level performance. All right, so here is a something to try on your own. You have a man and a woman performing a 1 rep max on back squat. The man weighs 200 and squatted 385. The woman weighs 145 and squatted 365. Who is stronger? Try it out on your own. And here is why we like percent body weight rather than comparing just straight up 1 rep max, right? If you have a 400-pound person, let's say like an NFL lineman, right? Just an absolutely massive person. That person, if they're lifting weights like they should lift a lot of weight. They're just a big human, right? So if you have like a 400-pound person saying, I lift 350 pounds, well, great, but you're an NFL lineman. You're probably not in the NFL if that's what your numbers are, but you should be lifting at least 100% of your body weight. Or what if you have like a 150-pound person that can lift 300 pounds? That's 2 times their body weight. So percent body weight is a much better way to compare people to people. We can compare different genders to each other, and we can get an idea of when you ask the question, who is stronger? This is the measure that you want to use. So that's it for metabolism and energy expenditure. Please let me know if you have any questions.